And welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, just welcome. My name is Rusty, and this is my channel where I talk about my favorite shows, my favorite movies, mostly horror, and my favorite music, mostly metal. And welcome to Severance. I fucking love this movie, obviously. Why don't you do movies you hate? This isn't fucking Rotten Tomatoes, man. This is me channel. I'm not here to do that. Severance, 2006. Directed by Christopher Smith. Written by James Morgan and Christopher Smith. And it stars Danny Dyer, who I absolutely love. I am a Danny Dyer fan. I don't know, I've just always been crazy about him. You probably have to be British to understand why some people would go at that. But I love Danny Dyer movies. I love Danny Dyer. So this stars Danny Dyer. This is my favorite Danny Dyer movie. That's him right there. Toby Stevens, Laura Harris, and Tim McInnerny. And yeah. That is for sure. So, Severance, which is a slasher with a good bit of comedy in it, was released in 2006. Now, Severance... No, it's not that stupid series shit. Severance opens where we see two girls running through the woods, scantily dressed, and a guy, I don't know, about 50-ish or something, and they're running through the woods, and these girls like fall into a pit, like a pit, and they can't get out, and they're trying to take their clothes off to make a rope ladder, and then we see the man come running by, and he looks down in the pit, and they're like, help us, don't leave, and he's like, fuck no, I gotta go. So he's running, and he hits a spring trap, that grabs you by the foot and holds you upside down from the tree. So he does that. He's hanging there, and we see someone come out with this big, giant machete butcher knife thing and gut him. And that's the beginning of the movie. So we switch then to a bus. On the side it says Palisade Defense. We learned that these 7 people, isn't it 7? Yeah, 7 people plus the driver. So 8 people, but they are being driven to a cabin retreat. They are to a lodge in the woods. They are going for team work, team building, exercises. And they're calling it a team building retreat. So on the way though, so you get to hear all the banter as you kind of get introduced to our characters. Now Steve, that's the one played by Danny Dyer. He is eating some stuff out of a bag, and Maggie is like, what are you doing? And he's like eating, he's like, there's some mushrooms. So he's eating all these magic mushrooms, and she's like, and he's like covered in drugs, right? He's got ecstasy on him and MDMA and all kind of shit. So he's a total little druggy geek, and he's sitting there leaving to go to this lodge with this business retreat and he's like eating mushrooms. So, before they even get there, he kind of starts like tripping. But right before they get into the area, there's this big giant tree down over the road. And the bus driver stops, and he refuses to go any further. And the guy tries to, the leader, Richard, he tries to get him to go a different route, and the driver refuses and ends up like going out, taking all their shit off, throwing them off the bus. So they end up grabbing their stuff and are going to have to walk to the lodge. So the driver strands them there. So they start walking to the lodge, and now Steve is tripping balls, right? And so as they're walking, this is like, the scene nearly makes me piss myself every time because it is so funny. He like just suddenly decides he needs to pee, and he just like leaves the group and walks off into the woods. When people do notice that he's gone, they turn around and go looking for him, where they find him standing with no pants. Because you see, earlier in the bus, he had been like talking about how asking Maggie had he pissed himself because he felt damp. And she's like, "No, you're not damp." So he's tripping on shrooms. So they find him with no pants, and he's standing there peeing. And they ask him, "What the fuck are you doing?" And he was the way that he says it, the stuff he turns around to them, just like that, and she's like, oh. And the friend Billy, he's like, "What are you doing, mate?" And he says, "You know what? The weirdest fucking thing just happened to me." And he starts telling him the story. It's like, I like really had to, take a slosh, and so I got out here and I took my pants off because, I didn't want to get damp. And all of a sudden, I seen this guy with like luggage go walking by and a balaclava. And, well, it wasn't luggage. It was kind of like a little travel bag. And Billy and her are looking at him like, it's the way he was telling the story was so fucking hilarious. Finally, she looks at him and she's like, "It's the shrooms, Steve." And then she tells him, he's like, "You take care of him." And she goes back. And he's like, "Oh, yeah, the shrooms." And Billy's like, "Dude, there's nothing out there." And Steve then just goes into this, "Look, mate, we're friends, but if you look at my cock one more time, I'm going to kick off." So it's like, it was just hilarious. That scene was so funny. Now, they end up like tying him with a leash and a rope for them to carry so that he doesn't wander off because he's so tripped out on shrooms. So they all do manage to finally get to the lodge, and it's like a fucking dump, right? And they go into it, and it's supposed to be like a luxury lodge, so everybody is really pissed. And Richard, tries to settle them down. He's the boss. So he's like, y'all settle down. We'll make the best of it. Everything will be all right. And Harris, he goes to find the generator. And stupid Gordon, he like starts playing on the pool because he doesn't think there's any water in it. So he's like jumping up and down on the... It's all so stupid. You would love it. But not only does Harris find the generator, he turns the generator on, but he also finds like filing cabinets. And when he opens up the filing cabinets, there's like soldier records, like, the case files, and it's like soldiers, but it's all in Russian, so he can't tell what it is. So he ends up taking it back, and they all settle in for dinner, and there's a really funny scene at dinner. And they start talking about those records, making up like what it could mean. Like, was this an old asylum? Did it used to be in an asylum or a prisoner of war camp, or what was this? So, Jill is the one who says that she knows what it is, that this place used to be a secret camp where they put these crazy soldiers who like to kill too much, and couldn't be controlled. So these little murder machines were put here. That's actually the closest thing to the truth, And so her story about what those records and all meant is actually pretty much the correct one. So I put Gordon is so daft. That's the damn truth. That boy is, I mean, he's like a rock. He's got the brains of a rock. So we then have this cool spider scene. That's where Jill, I love the way that they did this because she gets up out of bed. She's got to go pee. So she gets up out of bed and she picks her glasses up and her glasses fall on the floor and yet they're like covered in spider web and all. She puts them on and she stands up and there's this fucking big spider. I mean, it's like a good 4 inches in circumference and it's like crawling up her back. And she goes to the bathroom and you're like, oh my God, when she sees that, she is going to flip. She's going to trip completely out. So she goes, she uses the bathroom. The spider is still like walking around on her back. She comes back into the bedroom and there's this big mirror there and she's standing there and she combs her hair for a second and this spider crawls across her shoulder. And you expect there to be an insane freak out, right? But instead, she's just like, oh, poor thing, pretty bad. And it like crawls on her hand and she's got this big spider and I'm like, bitch, please. But she's like, oh, you know? And I'm like, okay, well, that was a fake out, wasn't it? Because you thought she was going to trip balls, right? No, So she goes to the window, and now you as a viewer are disarmed as well, right? So she goes to the window, she opens up the window to let it out, and then right across from her, in the fucking trees, is this fucking Deliverance Bushman face, like, at her, and she trips out, and you trip out. You know, you trip out because that was great. They disarmed you with the spider because you were all like ready for her to scream and freak out. And instead she was playing with it and putting it outside. So it totally threw you off guard and unprepared to see this camo striped face stick out of the tree right in front of you. So I thought that was a very masterful jump scare because it scared the absolute shit out of me. So now everybody's really freaking out, and they decide that what they'll do the next day, because everybody is just like, dude, this is over. This dumpy place, this teamwork retreat, this ain't working. We've been stranded. No, we're leaving. So Richard, he finally is like, okay, I tell you what, we'll make a deal. Tomorrow, Harris and Jill, you go to the top of the hill to try to get a signal, to get somebody to come pick us up, a driver. Get the driver to come back and pick us up, and we'll meet him back down there by the fallen tree. Meanwhile, we'll actually get one paintball team building exercise in. So the next day that happens, and Jill and Harris, they go walking up the hill to try to get signal. But on the way there, while the others, they play stupid paintball. Now, when Jill and Harris get to the top of the hill, they can't get nothing. But they didn't have really time anyway, because right as they do that, they find the bus. Not only do they find the bus, but they find the driver right out there, cut and mutilated all to hell. I mean, seriously gory shit, right? So they freak out, they get back into the bus, and they drive the bitch back, you know. So, well, let me not get ahead here. Right. Alright, so they found the cut up dead driver. They take the bus. Now, back where the other idiots are doing paintball, this is where the movie has turned very bloody, very violent, and very gory. It is not what you think. At the beginning, it seems like fun and games and it's all kind of comedy. But when they find that driver dead, the shit flips. And this movie becomes extremely violent, extremely gory, and pretty damn scary. And it doesn't turn out like the beginning of the movie thinks you will. At the 30-minute mark, this becomes a hellfest, you know. So as they're driving back, the paintballers are being their stupid selves. Gordon steps in a bear trap that like clamps on his leg right below the knee. And, oh my God, Billy and Steve are so fucking stupid. They keep trying to open it, right? But the stupidity of all of them works together to make it just... Every time they get it down and tell Gordon, like, get your fucking leg out, click, they lose it, and it clamps back on his leg again. They did that 4 fucking times. Until the very last time they're trying to open it again, his leg comes off with it. So Gordon has no leg below the knee. Now they managed to like, because you know you'd have bled to death very soon if they hadn't like wrapped it and pressured it and tourniqueted it. They tourniqueted? Tourniqueted? Can you tourniquet something? You can tourniquet something, but I don't think it could be tourniqueted. Anyway, so now that he's there without a leg, Jill and Harris show up with the bus. They try to get everybody, you know, everybody gets on, and Steve goes in to put Gordon's leg into the refrigerator, you know. Maybe they can put it back on when you get back to town, right? So they all get back on and try to get away. But of course, as they're trying to escape, one of the stalkers, or the stalker, throws a spike line across the road. I did know what that was called, but I just forgot it. The cops throw it, you know, to bust your tires. So the spike line busts the tires. The bus wrecks, flips on its side. Jill is like stunned. She's the first one to come out. She walks out into the woods. Harris, he walks out. Now earlier, when that trip they were taking up to the top of the hill for the signal before they found the bus, they had talked about her project in the business, which was she was trying to make non-lethal mines, you know, something about the mine could trap you. That way kids don't get their legs blown off later on when the war's over. So they had talked about, you know, how horrible humans are in the ways they come with to kill each other. And they talked about the guillotine. She was like, well, at least the guillotine wasn't painless. And that's when Harris told her, no, the guillotine is fucked up because the human brain, if it doesn't go into shock immediately, the human brain can stay functioning for, you know, 1.5 to 3 minutes after it's been cut off. So you could actually, like, see your body up there after your head's cut off. I don't really know if that's true or not, but that's fucking gross. So transport back. Harris goes wandering out after Jill, you know, because he's laying out there too. He sees Jill come walking by in a daze, and he's laying there, and then all of a sudden the stalker runs up on him with a big machete, beheads him, and all of a sudden the movie switches to his view, the point of view of the eyes of the head. So you're fucking rolling, and then it comes to a stop, and he's staring at his own body. And it then turns around and shows his head laying there, and his eyes are moving, and he's looking at his own body, and he smiles like I was right. You know what I mean? Which, who you gonna tell? You know? But at least he died knowing he was right about something, right? So, now that he's had his head cut off, sees his own body, Mag, Steve, Bill, even Gordon are still alive, and they have to walk all back to the lodge. So they go back to that lodge. Meanwhile, Jill, who had been walking through the woods, the stalker had like gotten her and had like tied her to a tree, and then using a flamethrower burnt her alive after saying shit like, "You're a fucking bitch," and "burn witch," and stuff like that, and he burnt her to death. So they get back to the lodge. Steve gives ecstasy. He's got some ecstasy on him, so he gives that to Gordon because at least it'll take the edge off, which I suppose would be true, you know. But of course he starts tripping on ecstasy with no leg, so that's kind of funny. And who goes to the bathroom? I think Billy goes to the bathroom, leaving Steve and Maggie. The fucking killer just literally walks in the door behind them, walks over there, gets Gordon, and drags Gordon out right behind them, and they don't even see it or hear it. So he takes Gordon right behind their back. They don't even hear him until like a little bit later. They hear him scream, and they turn around and he's gone. And Billy is like, where the fuck is he? They see the drag marks and they start following where he was taken down into the basement, where they discover all of these cells. This is when they start realizing that story that Jill told about this being some kind of camp where they kept these monstrous soldiers that couldn't stop killing is true. So in these cells down there is like a big scene very reminiscent of a Saw film or something, where Gordon is tied to a chair and he's like mutilated and he's cut up by this soldier who like actually cuts the logo of that company into his guts. It's that was rough. That's rough. So he eviscerates him, yeah. The four that are left find the basement cells. He tries to shoot them, the soldier, because they actually walk in on him cutting up Gordon. And he shoots them, and Richard runs one way. Richard has already ran out. He's scared shitless, so he had ran out. Steve runs up in one direction, and Maggie and Billy run in the other. They do manage to hide behind a wall in a different room, only to realize that Billy has been shot right through the chest. You know, he's like, "We'll be all right, we'll be okay." And then she's like, looks down, and they both look down, and they see he's got a big hole in his chest, and he dies right there in her arm. That was actually pretty sad. So Maggie is furious. She's like turned into Ripley from Alien. You know, that sent her over the edge. So she turns into sort of like a Ripley character. And, you know, she's going to fucking take this motherfucker out. It's the way it is. So, Steve manages to hide. He sees the soldier coming through. He hides in like a closet. And then he sees Maggie coming up the stairs behind this soldier. And she is like loaded for bear, right? She's turned into like this psycho. So right before she can get him though, she falls through a hole. And he starts to shoot her with the shotgun. But she rolls out of the way. And then he jumps down there. But the place is so old and beat up that when he jumps down there, he goes right through the floor. So from like here up, he's sitting there on the floor. The shotgun's right there. Billy comes around. Maggie picks up the shotgun and doesn't even hesitate. She just like points it right at him. She blows his head straight off, So she's definitely upset. So now we have Steve and Maggie are the finals so far. Richard's out there somewhere. They go looking, trying to get away. They're looking for him, but when they open the door to run outside, there's about 8 more soldiers standing there in a team. And you're like, oh, so it wasn't one. It was like a whole group. And you're like, well, this just got shitty, right? What are they going to do? She immediately blows one of them away with the shotgun and tells everybody else, to sit the fuck down, back off. So they kind of do. And then she's like, kind of side whispers to Steve that, he's like wearing some pretty shit right now. You know what I mean? She's like, yeah, especially since that was the last bullet. I don't have any more, So they end up taking off running. So you got this whole team after them. Meanwhile, Richard had been trying to get away to the woods when all of a sudden, click, he realizes that he has just stepped on a bouncing Betty. He has stepped on a mine. He's dead. He's not dead yet, but he's dead. Because there's no way you're going to get away. The second that he puts his foot up, he's dead. So he's kind of standing there perplexed, like, well, I'm just going to stand here and think for a while about this situation because, can't move. That's for sure. So that would be a dilemma. They should make a movie about that, right? Just make an 1.5 hour movie of somebody standing there on a mine trying to figure out what the fuck to do. Because when you go down, you're eventually going to fall asleep and fall off that bitch and die. So, I don't know. That would be a very tense movie. So he's standing there. They're after Maggie, and Steve. When they do manage to get away from him, they lose him. But then the team runs up, chases them in the right direction, and they run across Steve. They run across Richard. So Steve and Maggie run across Richard. Now, they're like, come on, let's go. And he's like, as a matter of fact, don't come any closer. Not only do you not come any closer, don't come into this area because it's full of mines and I'm standing on one. So that's a sad moment because they have to admit that he has to admit that they have to admit that he's fucking dead. He's just standing there dead. It just ain't happened yet. He tells them to step in his footprints and then jump to the tree and get past him. And he decides that, what can you do? He's going to try to help them, which was, considering his behavior through the movie, he sort of redeems himself because he's going to help them by, I guess, trying to take out some of these motherfuckers. So the team of killers, they actually come across Richard, and he talks to them. They call him all kind of names, and they realize, they're the ones who set the shit, right? So they realize where they're at and that he's standing on a mine. They're like, oh, okay, we got you. So they come up with some plan to use this fallen tree to get over it, the area, this fallen tree limb. And they're walking right over Richard. Well, their company designed this very mine that he's standing on, so he knows exactly what it's going to do. He lets a couple of them go past, and they spit on him and shit. He lets a couple of them go past, but then the 3 of them, the last little group of 3, he waits till they get right there by him, right over him, and he's just like, fuck you, and takes his foot off that and blows their ass all to hell. So that took out a little bit of the gang. There's only a couple left. There's 3, I think. There's 3 left. Yeah, I think so. So they're still after them. He blows them up. Okay. All right. I see. So they managed to get, because of what happened, they managed to get far ahead. When they run up through the woods, they run into this opening, and there's this big, beautiful luxury lodge. And they run up to the door, and they open the door, and it's that guy George they had been talking about. They were supposed to meet George at the lodge, and he's got these 2 escorts girls in there. So they're like, George, and he's like, Maggie, Steve, where the fuck have y'all been? I've been waiting for y'all since yesterday. So they went to the wrong place because of the bus crash. They thought they went in the wrong direction and went to the wrong. They actually went to this camp, this ex-military psycho camp, rather than going to the lodge, and he's been partying there for a day. So they tell him what's going on. He's like, fuck that, and he walks outside with a bazooka or a missile launcher. I've been looking for a chance to use this bitch. Because they're a military defense contractor. They create military weapons. So he's like, I've been waiting to use this bitch, because George is their boss of all of them. He goes out into the yard, and then here come those 3 guys, the 3 killers. And he aims the missile, and he's like, fuck you, to eat this, and he shoots it. And the missile goes towards him and then goes up into the air, and they all, including the killers, and Maggie, and Steve, and the 2 girls, they watch as that missile goes right up and blows a 747 out of the sky. And he was like, I forgot if there was radio signals around, it was going to go to that, not to the, you know what I mean? So if the plane hadn't have been flying overhead, the missile would have had nowhere to go, but it locked in on the plane signal. Okay, that was funny. Not for the people in the plane, I'm sure. But that's when they all start running. Now, this is where we realize something. That guy and these 2 girls from the original at the beginning of the movie. Remember, we saw the 2 girls going, they fall into a hole. Well, we all realize that now. That's where, because Maggie and Steve went one way, they went the other, and that's where it happens. So he tells them to run. Everybody starts going, and that's when Maggie hits a spring trap. She's hanging upside down. And Steve fights 2 of them. So Maggie is hanging from a tree, and Steve is like fighting, and this is like a bloody, intense fight. When he gets into this right position, it's this big, giant butcher knife, like a Rambo thing, only twice as long. And he gets into this right position after having his ass kicked all over the place, and he shoves that knife right up that guy's literal ass. He didn't stab him anyway. It went right through. He got him. It was what the fuck? So you got one guy, he's like crouched over with a big giant ass sticking out of his knife. He's got a big giant knife sticking out of his ass. That had to be hurting. He's beating the shit out of the other guy. Maggie manages to get down. She smashes the one that was on her, smashes him to bits, puts a big giant rock on his head, and smashes him with a brick. Steve AKs one and then gets stabbed in the shoulder. So he AKs that one that managed to stab him in the shoulder. And then he turns around to the one that's got the knife up his ass and kicks him in the chest and tells him to have a seat. Think about that for a second. So he falls directly on his ass in a seated position. Okay? You can imagine. So he already had a big giant machete knife sticking up his ass a good bit in. That finished the job, put it this way, when he landed on his ass. So that was pretty funny. So Steve is nearly beat half to death. Maggie's managed to get away from her. She's ran, and she has ran upon this like old train station that went to that camp, the little docking station. She manages to find a working phone, only they put her on hold. And she stays on hold so long that she just gives up and decides to go fight the guy herself. Which, is supposed to be a joke about, the cops putting you on hold. So, meanwhile, Steve, he's like meandering through the woods, trying to get away, beat half to bloody death. And he's laying up against this tree, thinking, well, I guess I'm just going to die here. When all of a sudden he hears a noise, and he looks over to the side, and all of a sudden he sees like a rope coming out of a hole with like shirt, bras, panties, and stuff like that. So he sees this rope made of lingerie and stuff with a stick, and that's when we realized that from the beginning of the movie, where those girls fell in the hole, this was the girls in the hole. And he had found them. So we switch back to Maggie, who is now getting the shit beat out of her, and they are having a big giant fight with her and the main last killer. Right before, he's like, comes at her with a flamethrower, and the fight's over because he is fisting to light her up, So he like aims the flamethrower at her, and right as he starts to mash it, he is AK'd all over the place, and you hear these girls screaming, and you turn around, and Steve is hobbling up, and these two girls are in that slow-mo with their their jackets, and they're doing the slow-mo AK, and that guy, the last stalker. So they kill him. They get on up there to Maggie. They're rescued. They go down. They find the boat. They find a boat on the lake. And then they all four get on it, and they start paddling out. And that was it. And that's the way it ends. So, like I said, I absolutely love this movie. It is my favorite Danny Dyer movie. My other one being Green Street Hooligans. I like Vengeance. I like a lot of movies with Danny Dyer in it. But this one is fucking hilarious. And like I said, that's Maggie right there. That's Maggie. Yeah, that's Steve. But this movie is so fucking funny. And turns so gory. It's like when you look it up on International Movie Database, just look at the keywords. Something violence, it said. Some kind of violence. Not gratuitous. Over the top. It was it was signifying that it was like extremely violent, like so violent that it was overly violent. And yeah, and I think that's one of the coolest things about Severance is like for the first 25 minutes, you are laughing at these people, especially Steve and Gordon. You're laughing at all of them. They're so silly. And then all of a sudden, there is a big change in the tone of this movie. And it becomes very, very violent. Very, very bloody. The kills are beyond. You know, Gordon being eviscerated down there. Having his leg cut. Everything was really gory. Very gory. It didn't just show a little bit. So, yeah. If you've never seen Severance, it is a fantastic backwoods slasher mixed with some comedy. And no, it has absolutely nothing to do with that stupid series that's out. It's from 2006. It's very easy to find on eBay. You can get this brand new for $6-7, the DVD. I don't know if it ever got a Blu-ray release. I wish it did. But, you know, you can get this very cheap. Brand new, still in the wrapper. And, yeah, it's widescreen. Great special features. It's a really worth having in your collection. Backwoods slasher. Funny as fuck. Then turning bloody and violent as fuck. Great story. Great final people. Because it doesn't have a final girl, but Steve's final girl acts are great fun to watch. Maggie kicks ass. The two escorts being, you know, saving her with the AK-47, that was pretty funny. So yeah, it's a lot of really, it took a lot of backwoods slasher elements and put them together. And Severance is, like I said, definitely a slasher worth having in your collection. And yes, love you, miss you. Bye-bye. I appreciate any time you dropping by. And always remember, never forget, you're a very, very special person. And I will see you in the next thing I do, which will include my March update, because I am still behind a month. Love you, miss you. Bye-bye. I'll see you very, very soon. I hope. Unless I drop dead. Bye.